Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Common Language. We're so excited you're here. Today, we are going to broach the topic of Christian nationalism, evangelicalism, and how Christianity is shaping the future of our country. In light of recent events, we had this topic in mind and thought now might be a good time to explore the background behind Christian nationalism, why it exists, and really questioning the idea of church versus state. And is there truly a separation here? So, we're going to get into all of this today and talk about religion, which we're not supposed to talk about. So, I'm going to toss it over to Mac to give our top line and tea for this week, and then we'll get into the combo.
Thanks, Case. So, starting off our top line and tea for this week, first up, the government is heading more and more towards a shutdown. So, the Republicans and Democrats are currently at a stalemate. The Democrats were pressuring Trump to meet with them so that they could negotiate and find some agreeable terms. Reportedly, Trump was at first open to this idea and was going to meet with Schumer and Jeffries. However, he canceled that meeting. And now we are left about a week out from the government shutdown, and the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, they released a memo basically prepping federal agencies for this shutdown, instructing them on how to prepare for a reduction in force and layoffs. Like I said, Congress has about a week, but I think every time we get to this point at the end of September when government funding runs out and is there going to be a shutdown? And it goes back and forth, and then ultimately they come through in the nick of time. I have a feeling this time may be a little bit different, but it's still a little bit too close to call. Number 2, it is tariff time again. So you guys know we did a whole episode on tariffs, so if you need more context, feel free to check out that episode. But an update here is that on Thursday, Trump announced a whole new slew of tariffs that are going to go into effect October 1st. These tariffs are mainly in regards to pharmaceuticals, semi-trucks, kitchen cabinets, and furniture. And the tariffs range from about 25 to 100%. So we're likely going to see this impact the housing and the healthcare sector. And another key point here, Trump said that the revenues from these tariffs, he's looking to give to farmers, to pass that on to farmers. We know that farmers are one of the groups that have been deeply impacted by the trade wars. So Trump is making to look good on some of the promises that he committed himself to farmers. So we'll see what the details are. They have yet to announce who exactly, like what farmers would qualify for this check basically and how much it would be, but more to come. Number 3, former FBI Director James Comey was officially indicted. As you guys know here, there is a long history between James Comey and Trump. They are essentially nemesis at this point, dating back to Trump's first term. He has been charged with 2 felonies, both related to essentially lying to Congress in testimonies and in hearings, and specifically in September 2020. This move came after the president had been intensifying his pressure on the Department of Justice to act and indict Comey. We've even seen some posts on Truth Social, which may have meant to be text, but nevertheless were posted on social, where it looks like he's directing Pam Bondi to take action and to make these charges against Comey. This raises the flag for a lot of people around Trump weaponizing DOJ against his enemies and for retribution. There's a whole slew of reasons why they don't like each other, but specifically, Comey investigated Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and its ties to Russia, and Trump is very unhappy with him. Comey released a video saying that he is innocent, so let's have a trial. And a trial they will have. So that is our top line in T and 3 for this week.
Bananas, as usual. Thank you for that, Mac. I do have one question, which is when we talk about tariffs again, isn't there some legal issues going on with the tariffs as well? We're not sure if they're actually legal. So he's still rolling more out, but they may need to be all rolled back at some point.
Yeah, so the case there is that some of the tariffs are issued based on different legislations and different precedents and different policies. So some of these tariffs may be legal, some of them may not be legal. There are specific tariffs that he used under certain policies that are held up in court right now. The latest ruling on them is that they weren't found to be an overreach of his power under that specific statute. Like we say these days, everything is basically rolling up to the Supreme Court. And that's what Trump wants at the end of the day because it is conservative
Conservative
leaning,
majority. Yeah.
but it takes time for it to go up to that level.
Right. Just more food for thought here as we're processing all of this information. So, moving on, let's get into the topic at hand. So, when we talk about Christian nationalism, what is it? According to Christianity Today, Christian nationalism is the belief that the American nation is defined by Christianity and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. Christian nationalists assert that America is and must remain a Christian nation. In effect, this ideology advocates for laws and public policies that reflect a specific set of conservative Christian values. So we see this a lot, Christian nationalism and just the rise of people such as Charlie Kirk, which we will get into. And it's important to know that Christian nationalists, their whole purpose is also to continue to integrate church and state, and that's the way that the nation was intended to be. So that differs from evangelicalism, which evangelicals are a branch of Protestant Christianity that's distinct because of their focus on the Bible, personal faith, and spreading the gospel, whereas Catholics and mainline Protestants lean more heavily on tradition, sacraments, or broader social engagement. The 2016 election solidified evangelicals' role as the central Republican constituency, and white evangelicals remain the biggest engine of Trump supporters. So, when we talk about Christianity, there are many denominations, and those denominations are essentially offshoots of each other. What I want to focus on is the fact that Christian nationalists believe that the United States should be a Christian nation. That's their core belief. That is what they are pushing. And some facts around religion in the US that are important to incorporate. In 2024, the Public Religion Research Institute published the State of Affairs for Religious Beliefs in the US. So 65.3% are Christian. Those largest groups are white evangelical Protestants at 13%, white mainline non-evangelical Protestants, 13%, and white Catholic at 12%. So over almost half of that is just white focused Christianity. Okay. Then the remaining 35% is 28% religiously unaffiliated, so no religion, and 7.5% represent your non-Christians. So Hindu, Judaism, Islam, all those religions actually only make up 7.5% of the country. So when you put things in that type of perspective, it does make sense why you would have a rise in Christian nationalism because it is the most dominant religion that we have. However, 35% is over a third of the population does not affiliate with this. So when you wrap your head around that sense, it really doesn't make sense. But that's the top O-line overview. Let's get into how this fits into culture, policy, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So the Christian nationalism ideology and the evangelical community, we have seen really shape politics today, specifically the conservative movement within politics. And we're seeing this both from a policy decision making standpoint as well as a cultural standpoint, how they're engaging voters, how they're communicating with voters about key messages. But starting off with the actual policy, it's really interesting the role that Christian conservatives have played in Supreme Court decisions and other government decision making. So, taking us back to 2022, the fall of Roe v. Wade, this was like monumental and a big shift in the landscape and in policy.
Yeah.
And Christian conservatives played a huge role in this turn. Roe v. Wade is the Supreme Court decision that gave women across the country, no matter where you live, access to abortion, right? It made abortion legal, and the overturn of Roe v. Wade put it back into the state's hands. I wouldn't say that all Christians believe that abortion should be legal or illegal. It depends on, again, their perspective on how the church should be integrated into the state. But nevertheless, the Christian conservatives have utilized their resources and their influences to advocate for decisions like we saw in the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Another key situation where we saw conservatives really use their influence is more recently. So, prior to this new IRS decision, there was an understanding that churches, because they fall into the 501(c)(3) tax status, which is basically like charitable nonprofits, as a charitable nonprofit and having that tax status, one of the conditions is that you are not to endorse political candidates. Specifically, this is like under the Johnson Amendment. Like that's the policy that restricts political activities of tax exempt organizations. And conservative Christians have long opposed this amendment because they think it impedes on their First Amendment rights. They say that they can't freely express their political beliefs because they're held to this tax status. And recently, on July 7th, 2025, the IRS agreed to settle a lawsuit brought on by conservative religious groups. And under this new interpretation, it allows pastors and churches to endorse or oppose political candidates from the pulpit. So, those two cases are really interesting, seeing how the conservatives have used their resources, their influences, their advocacy, their constituencies to move the courts, move the IRS in their favor. Another piece of this is the cultural aspect of it.
Right.
And that's also very influential, especially like as Casey was saying, in light of recent events, there's been a lot of discourse around Charlie Kirk and other key influencers and the role that they've had in shaping the conservative landscape. It's been front and center in the headlines, the role that he played in Trump's election
Yeah.
using Christian nationalism as an ideology to back Trump. To your point, Case, when you were reading the Christian national definition, it really falls in line with a lot of Kirk's viewpoints and his position on policy. Kirk's faith was central to his life and to his political views. He was the co-founder of Turning Point USA, a conservative youth organization, but he also founded a more like explicitly religious group, TPUSA Faith, whose mission was to, quote, eliminate wokeism from the American pulpit. He often referenced his Christian faith when he talked about political issues. And he said that the U.S. was set up by and for not just Christians, but specifically Protestant Christians. He didn't believe the country could function any other way. And he was quoted saying, the body politic of America was so Christian and was so Protestant that our form and structure of government was built for the people that believed in Christ our Lord. One of the reasons we're living through a constitutional crisis is that we no longer have a Christian nation, but we have a Christian form of government, and they're incompatible. So you cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian population. So we see him espousing this Christian nationalism ideology, saying this country was founded by Protestant Christians, and that's how we have to operate if we want to be a stable, thriving country.
It's interesting that he calls it a constitutional crisis.
I think that's a little hyperbolic. However, at the same time, I think it does get to this idea that we are facing this new understanding of how we interpret the Constitution, knowing that this country was founded by people who had a bias and a leaning towards Christian values and beliefs. People are reckoning with that. And he's saying we actually need to keep it that way and we need to stop departing from the interpretation from the Christian perspective. But is he right or is he wrong? It's up to you to decide. But
Right. To me, he's making an irrelevant point because a third of the country is not Christian. We need to actually make policies and practice government that works for everyone and all people. This comes against fundamental core beliefs that are not aligned. For him, this was his absolute steadfast truth. And for me, I'm like, this is completely incorrect.
yeah, and it's also interesting too because if you look back, we saw Kirk shift on this. Earlier in his public facing career, he said that there should be that separation. However, he later reversed that and started backtracking from that, and then went on to say that it's nonsense to think that there should be or that there could be a separation between church and state. And that seeps into kind of his thinking around the role of the church versus the role of the government. His belief system, to my understanding, was that the church should help the needy, not necessarily the government. Like the government shouldn't be responsible. But he also used his faith in connection with a lot of other ideas, like saying that to the Supreme Court thing, abortion, it goes against Christian beliefs and should be illegal, and that DE and I was unbiblical. I'm not quite sure how DE and I is unbiblical. I would need more on that specific stance because it's my understanding that Jesus helped the most oppressed and
Right.
people on the margins of society. But
Confusing.
yeah,
Confusing. I believe in a separation of church and state, and I believe in a separation of church and everything. I think that you don't need to be worshiping a higher power to be acting with strong morals and strong values. I think that we should take care of others because I think that's a good thing to do. I don't need to be told that's a good thing to do by someone else. That's my belief.
yeah,
So it genuinely confuses me because I don't understand why they believe that one faith is higher than any others. Fundamentally, when you look at the pyramids of each faith, it's like they're very similar. It's just that they're calling things differently and they're organizing things differently. And inherently, the religions were all funded and changed because of politics and because of people disagreeing and because of the Bible being interpreted differently. And
right,
other texts being used instead. Everyone's doing whatever they want to do. So,
right.
shouldn't that just be the stance? Protecting people and working together. For some reason, this country and this movement has a really hard time allowing people the freedom to be different. And I feel
Yeah,
like that's really what we're talking about. It's like no one's allowed to be different. They won't stop talking about trans people
yeah,
when that they make up what 1% of the population. They're not hurting anyone.
yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no scripture about trans people in the Bibles, including Jesus condemning them or saying that anything about them. It's not really interesting the phenomenon of using religion and faith to inform political ideology and policy because it is a powerful tool. Although we talk about this church versus state, and I do agree that there should be a separation, like how pragmatic is that really? And we have a country that was founded by Protestants. And when you look at our presidents, it was groundbreaking that Joe Biden was Catholic and JFK was Catholic. We've only had two Catholic presidents, the rest Protestant. And obviously, we've had no Jewish presidents, no Muslim, no Hindu, no Buddhist, no other religions have been represented at the highest leadership of our country.
Yeah.
And the proof is in the pudding. That's who we are. And I think it is okay for people to form their political beliefs based on their religious beliefs. I think it gets tricky though when we start having a government that invokes religion to justify and advance specific policies. As we've seen with this kind of phenomenon in this movement with Christians and the conservative movement using their interpretation of Christianity to justify conservative values such as man and the woman
Right.
submits to the husband, traditional nuclear family.
Right.
Like,
Women will be so much happier if they're at home with their children.
right.
That's why the natural order is all messed up. That's why men are lonely. Yeah. What I fully understand is that if you are a person of faith, that really would bleed into all areas of your life, and I understand that. But what I don't understand is infringing on other people's choices. And I do believe that from a moral perspective, a lot of these Christian values make a lot of sense to me in terms of being kind to your neighbor and helping the needy, clothing the poor. Like all this stuff is like stuff that Jesus wrote about, like you were saying earlier. I believe in this as a person. And I just feel that our government should be operating from a place of what is the best for the population. And do I think that the best for the population is to be charitable and to be forgiving and to be kind to people? Yeah, I think that some of that will happen naturally. I don't think we need to push this narrative because what's happening is that it's othering everybody else, number
Mhm.
one. So it's if you're not Christian, then you're doing something wrong. And number two, I feel like it's just used to create divisiveness. And that is not a Christian value. So
Yeah,
they lose me when they do things that are inherently just not nice things to do when they're supposed to be practicing what they preach. It's super hypocritical for someone like Charlie Kirk to say very hateful things about people who he doesn't even know and he has no understanding of. Where do we go from there? Because we need to start understanding differences.
it's interesting the role that he played in this movement. Like, truly, where do we go from here? Obviously, we know earlier this month, tragically assassinated at a college campus event and had this huge memorial service where there were Christian singers who were performing, a lot of other Christian people who spoke to his legacy and his faith and how important that was in his politics. But then you also had Erica Kirk up there referencing the Bible and how that influenced her to forgive the shooter. But then you had Trump follow
Yep.
and the opposite, like actually diametrically opposed to what she just said, when the Bible literally says, love and pray for
Yep.
your enemies. So that's what I actually don't understand. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around is how we have seen the evangelical support for Trump so strong. And yet, so much of his rhetoric
Mhm.
and his position, and I know he's embraced that coalition, but I've never seen him be like outwardly religious or anything. So it's so fascinating. And I actually just don't even quite understand it myself how what I would think would be strange bedfellows have come together to move this ideology and policy agenda forward.
It is really crazy because Trump is the antithesis of Christian values. I did a little rewind because I was raised Roman Catholic. Catholicism is like the strict version of Christianity. There's tons of rules, there's tons of sit down, stand up, do the side of the cross here, sacraments that need to be made. There are commandments that you have to follow, and cardinal virtues and theological virtues. And these virtues combat the seven deadly sins, which to me is the more interesting topic because when you go through the seven deadly sins, Trump exemplifies all of them. So it's lust. Let's not bring up his countless sexual assault allegations. Pride, say less. Envy, say less. Gluttony, say less. Greed, laziness, and wrath. So even at a memorial service, he is spewing his wrath about his hatred of his enemies. And like he used that word, I hate them. Like you can't be more clear. So how did they connect?
I don't even know where this comes from. Like, I get it to a certain extent. Again, the whole idea of this interpretation of the Bible that says man, women, kids, like that traditional family structure.
Right.
but it starts to get a little confusing for me when we talk about embracing the others, right? Because this administration has made it very clear that the other is not welcome in this country. But when we look at the Bible and the teachings of Jesus, he was all about reaching out to the outcasts in society and the most marginalized in society and lifting those people up. So many people say today that like Jesus would be a socialist, that his teachings are really socialism in terms of his approach to and his thinking around poverty and women and those who have been cast out of society, and the right have flipped it to their advantage because there was a moment in time, like I think in going back to the Obama days, he
Yeah.
talked about his faith and
Yep.
his religion because there were people that I think thought that he was like Muslim or something.
Yeah.
And so he made it very clear, like, I'm Christian. And actually, Obama was very closely affiliated with a church in Chicago. And he spoke very clearly about his religion and how his Christianity called him to alleviate poverty. Think of policies that helped immigrants come to this country for refuge. But now we see the cultural shift and the policy shift.
Yep. Yep. It's really crazy. And going back to what I was saying earlier too about the separation of church and state and how for me, it in ways it should be so clear. I think there are also ways in which it'll never be clear and we're never going to really get that separation. And I'm not sure if that separation even exists. When I was doing the prep for this episode, I was trying to remember growing up and the Catholic Church and also just like my lifestyle in terms of I went to public school and I remember every morning the bell would ring and we would all have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And you're pledging to God and the country in that moment. And that's in a regular public school setting. So it does feel as though from a very young age, we're taught like God in this country and liberty and peace and all of these things should go without standing. We're preaching this from the age 5 years old. I
Yeah.
don't know. And the fact is that we didn't pray in school, but the Pledge of Allegiance is like a prayer, could be
Yeah.
interpreted that way. I was listening to an NPR episode about Christian nationalism, and something they mentioned was the flags at Charlie Kirk's memorial. There was tons of military flags, tons of American flags, and they said that actually within a church, they wouldn't allow an American flag to be raised because God is in charge of all nations, not just the US. So that's actually a conflict of interest for the church to even have the flags be there,
Yeah.
which was interesting to me. So I'm curious, Mac, because you have a different religious background in terms of growing up in a church and around that and what that reflection kind of means for you.
Yeah. I think that's a great question because, like you were saying, she grew up religious, as did I. My mom is a pastor of a church, it's a Baptist church.
Shout out Pastor Maureen.
Yes, stream on YouTube, First Baptist Church of Princeton. And my mom grew up Pentecostal, which is like a whole another level of tradition and religion. I mostly grew up Baptist, but also a little bit non-denominational. But I've even seen the shift in religion and policy around some of the issues that you were talking about. I feel like growing up, my understanding or what I heard in church and from the religious community is that things like being gay is a sin. And now I am happy because there have been churches in different denominations that have come out and said that's not true, that Jesus
Mhm.
loves everyone,
Right.
actually, and
Right.
that everyone is welcome here. And I've seen that change, and I feel like that is progress. That is a good
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
And I think the underlying message and takeaway that I got from the church and my understanding interpretation is what I was saying earlier, which is that Jesus was about helping the oppressed. And going back to what you said about the church flying American flag, and it's go back and read the Bible. Jesus was from the Middle East.
Yeah.
He was not like blonde hair, blue eyes, like the way that he is portrayed, I think, in a lot of American Christian depictions of
Right.
him. He was Jewish. He hung out with prostitutes and tax collectors who in those times were seen as the scum and the bottom of society. And he was all about forgiving, mercy, justice, helping those most in need. And when I think about how that informed my politics and my beliefs, it is about poverty alleviation. It is about making sure that women have access to the health care that they need to live happily and securely. And because it all comes down to people's interpretation of the Bible, because this book was written many moons ago. We are 2025 years after death of
Right.
Christ at this point. So this book was written many years ago, and many people interpret it very differently. There was this evangelical kind of influencer that I followed, and her whose story really inspired me. And again, I think it shifts to at one point we saw the Christian community get behind more progressive ideals, and now it's shifted again back to the conservative side. But her name was Rachel Held Evans, and she was an evangelical, and she got this awakening around the interpretation of the Bible, and she came to do these kind of demonstrations of literal interpretations of the Bible, because if you read the Bible, it says some crazy stuff in there, and you read it literally. If you do this, then you have to do that, or blah, 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 blah. And when she did them, it obviously is silly playing
Right.
that in modern times. And she came to understand that God, our God, is someone who is for justice, who is for dismantling inequality and oppressive structures in our
Mhm.
society. And so she challenged the evangelical community on some of their widely held beliefs. And so I think that's the kind of thinking and interpretation of the Bible that like I grew up with and that I understand. But like you said, there has been so many different denominations and like sects within Christianity who interpret the Bible one way, and
Mhm.
then they use that as a tool to advance different policy agendas.
Yeah.
So it comes down to like how you interpret it. But growing up, even though I grew up very religious, going to Sunday school, church, worship services, Christian camps, Lord Jesus, you guys, do you know? Fun fact about me. I went to a Christian sleepaway camp every summer for 2, 3 weeks. We would sing all these like Jesus songs. And one of the songs that like stood out to me that I always think about now is you would sing the song that goes, "Yes, I'm number three, THIRD, Lord, I'm third. That's where you want me to be. Let the fellow man and let the great I am run in front of me. I may be back in the pack, but I'm headed for victory." And so all that to say, it's like you got to put like other people before yourself. You have to put God before yourself. And it's yes, you do. Like you have to help others, but also it's like this idea of I feel like it's like this indoctrination of not taking care of yourself.
Yes. I'm just gonna say just
You know?
selflessness over your own well-being.
Hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
so all that to say, we sang a lot of crazy songs. We had Bible study every day, like had to memorize all these different verses. And I'm rolling my eyes, which I shouldn't be because I love Jesus. Thank you, God. Thank you, from whom all blessings flow. But it does irk me when I see
Mhm.
people use his writings, his teachings, and that faith to get behind anti-immigrant policies, to get behind anti-abortion policies, because that's
Yeah.
not what the Bible's about.
Yeah, I think that religion is very personal. And I think
Yeah.
that everyone should have their religious freedom and be able to practice whatever it is that they believe. Yes, our country was founded by Protestants, white Protestant men. And so that obviously is going to be reflected in our constitution and in some of our legal practices, no doubt. But my challenge to the Christian nationalists and my challenge to people who want to emulate Charlie Kirk is that's not today's reality.
Yeah. It is interesting to see how things ebb and flow or the shifts kind of back and forth. because going back to the question you were asking about how I was brought up, and then the other things we were talking about with like religious leaders integrating into the political arena, the Black church specifically has been very distinct from a lot of the white evangelicals who were getting behind Trump and supporting Trump. A lot of Black congregations had been historically more left, and specifically the civil rights era. If we look at Martin Luther King Jr.,
Yeah.
who was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he used the Bible and his theology as a leader in the church space to talk about unity and to talk about equality and to talk about character.
Yep.
And the tables have turned again. And maybe we need to look at someone like a James Talarico, who is running for Senate in Texas as a Christian Democrat religious leader who is speaking to a lot of those things that I think MLK did and that some of those like Christian progressives have. And he has a really strong message and he's a great communicator and he's doing a great job of bridging the Christian community and Christian values, which I think, again, it's not even Christian values because I think they resonate with it's not like only Christians believe in morality. It's
Which is my whole point.
but he
Yeah.
identifies as Christian. He's from Texas. Obviously, we know what that comes with. So I think he's someone that the Democratic Party should look to when they're
Agreed.
trying to turn the tables again and use the tool for good. And the messaging that he's putting out there, I think, has
Mhm.
been very powerful.
Yeah. Honestly, it feels like the Christians need to be set back on track. Like it almost feels like they're off track.
Yeah.
So it's a conversation about the fact that the history of our country will walk through the door with us everywhere we go, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to erase this stuff, but how are we progressing? And it's not pushing a progressive agenda. It's just how are we progressing? Because we have to progress every day. The sun goes down and then it comes back up. That's what happens. So every day we are moving and changing.
Yeah.
Period. So, how are we using like our skills that we have, things that we know, technology, and all of this that is here? You can use it for good or you can use it for evil.
Right.
So, how are
Right.
we using it?
Yeah.
And I do think that there will fundamentally always be a bit of church within the state and a bit of state within the church. I think that they are
Yeah.
entwined. To Charlie's point, that is how our country was founded. Like you said, we're not going to erase history, but there's just more to the story now.
Yeah, that theme comes up a lot in our conversations, how these two things are mirroring each other and influencing each other, and how you can't really quite disentangle them altogether. How do we like live that out in our society, in our culture, in our policy making in a way that helps everyone?
Yeah, yeah. And I also do want to say that I think that there is power that should be left to the states to decide. I'm not someone that believes that the federal government should have 100% control over everything. Because if you're telling me there's a state that's really conservative and they want to have a prayer in school or something,
Oklahoma is, I think they're putting Bibles in all the classrooms.
yeah, listen, I think that people should be able to do that if they want to do that, if that's how their constituents are voting and
Right.
it's a very Christian area, then
Right.
yeah, who am I to say they can't do that? But going back to Roe v. Wade, that for me is like a
Right.
non-negotiable. That is a women's healthcare issue. That is a safety issue. That's not something that we play with. But if
Yeah.
there's other things that make sense in a community that they agree on, then yeah, I think that's fine. I think that's also why we have it, red states and blue states. You can live in areas that culturally meet your needs. So it's more about respecting that and saying, you really should just let us live. There's a no tolerance for anybody to be able to exist anymore. It's like you have to live within this box. And it's increasingly more white and increasingly more exclusive. And this administration is only allowing that box to get tighter. What's going to be really interesting going forward is who is going to emerge as like the next big leader within the movement. Will it continue the rise that it's on right now because this administration was able to capitalize so much on this evangelical situation. They're getting the spotlight right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the ways they did that was through the whole trans conversation, right? Like stoking that fear and that kind of more traditional Christian beliefs around those issues,
Yep.
kind of leveraging that to get behind this broader policy agenda. That's just my 2 cents. But to your point, Kate, I think obviously this discourse, this dates back to the founding of our country. And so it's not going away, especially anytime soon. This will continue to be a central piece of politics, policy, conversation. It will just be interesting to see how it continues to evolve and shape the
Mhm.
politics and who the leaders will be.
And we're seeing that play out in real time.
We'll see what's to come and then we'll dissect that too. But in the meantime, follow us on all of our platforms. That includes YouTube, Instagram, Substack, and TikTok for more updates. And we're excited to chat more next week.